it up and see, and let's look at the text. Love better woman. I don't have that verse reference off the top of my head. Why don't you keep answering it, and I'll look this up.
It's going to be.
It's not showing up.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it's women.
Well,
yeah, here it is. It's 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26. David, after Jonathan has died, David sings the song, Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 25 and 26. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war have perished. And so first of all, when you look at this, what you're seeing is it's poetry and it's poetic language. You're looking at humans in verse 27 being called weapons of war. And so right away when you come to it, you're looking at something that it's poetic in nature. It's hyperbolic. And so when it says that his love is surpassing even the love of women, well, that would one thing that would do is that would cause you to take a step back and go, well, who are the women in David's life? And what were his relationships with women like? Were they good? Were they bad? Were they enjoyable? Well, he's got interesting relationships with women. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about his relationships. They're not really good. I mean, he's got some issues, right? He's married.
He's more focused on other things, I think.
Right. He's got some issues. And so first of all, when you kind of look at it, you go, well, I could see how he would say that. A really good friend, better than the love of women. I understand. And the other thing is that if you know what the relationship between a husband and wife is supposed to be like, then this is definitely a hyperbolic statement, right? As good as that marriage relationship is, this was even better.
Yeah.
And so it's a picture, just like calling them weapons of war. Well, they're not weapons of war. They're humans. And so you're dealing with this poetic device.
You like Forrest saying he's my best good friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of a husband and wife are to be best friends. You're my closest friend. So if I were to say that someone's even closer, like my bestest best friend, that's kind of like what I would imagine him saying.
Yeah. But we do that too. You'll hear people all the time, and they'll talk about multiple people as their best friend. It's like, look at best, you can have one.
You're super best.
Right? You can only have one. But we do that all the time with language. We realize that language isn't restrictive. Generally speaking, it's something that is kind of fluid, and especially when you start dealing with poetry. And so when you look at this, what you have to be careful anytime you talk about this particular topic is you have to realize that again, like we just said with the weapons of war, they're not weapons of war, they're human beings. And so when you talk about this particular topic, everybody that you're talking about is a human being. And you have got to be respectful and loving to everyone who is a human being. We are to be known by our love, and we're to be known by our kindness and mercy and compassion towards all people. And so we have to be very careful that when you talk about this topic, when you talk about homosexuality, that you are very careful to do it in a loving way and to remember that everybody that you're talking about is a human being. And you have to be conscious of that. And that even if there are certain actions that you disagree with, this is, again, very much like the language discussion. This is a very nuanced topic in the fact that you're dealing with attractions and feelings and actions and all sorts of different elements that create a layered discussion. And so while you might be able to say something like same-sex attraction, so a person who just finds themselves drawn to somebody of the same sex or the same gender, that's never really spoken about in the Bible. Right? That particular thing is never spoken about. And so what the Bible tends to talk about is actions. And so there are certain actions that the Lord would say you cannot do, but he doesn't really speak to how one feels. So it is entirely possible for somebody to feel a same-sex attraction and to avoid the behavior that the Bible talks about, and that's fine. And so it really is. It's a nuanced discussion. But when you just look at the verse that's in question in 2 Samuel chapter 2 or chapter 1, and so the reason why we kind of brought that in by way of introduction is that anytime you talk about human sexuality, it really is an in-depth, complicated discussion, and very rarely is there a simple answer to it, especially because we do a really good job of messing everything up. We're just good at that. And so but with that kind of as the backdrop, where we have to be careful because we're talking about people, and we love people, and we want to make sure that people know that we love them. That's the important part, regardless of how I love everybody, but it's important that they know that I love them. So I have to communicate that. But in this backdrop of a really complicated discussion, when you come to 2 Samuel chapter 1, when we ask questions like this, we have to be very strict in dealing with the text. If we're going to say that, 2 Samuel chapter 1, well, this gives permission for you to have a same-sex relationship because Jonathan and David are in a same-sex relationship here. Well, then when you come to the text would have to say that. And I hold the same standard of accountability in the other direction. For somebody to say, look, this passage clearly shows that you can't do that. So I'll give you an example. People will often go to the creation account in the garden and say that God created Adam and Eve. Well, I think you could infer, and that's what people try to do, that, well, God made this pairing, and so anything else is wrong. Well, you have multiple wives mentioned in several places throughout the text. In one place, it says that God gives David multiple wives, and that's not following the pattern, but here you have God doing it. And so again, you have to go to the text, and what does the text actually say? And so you can't go to the garden and say, here, homosexuality is wrong because it's not here in the garden. Well, other things aren't there either. Before the fall and after the fall, it's weird. But what you can do is you can go to places in the text where it is specifically talked about. Like in the law, in Leviticus 18, it talks about it specifically. It outlaws it. It outlaws actions. And that's, again, that nuanced discussion. You can go to places like in 1 Corinthians where Paul is talking, and Paul actually uses some very graphic language to outlaw actions, or to say these actions are wrong. And so you have to, anytime you approach that topic, you really do have to be a stickler to the text. We're not going to read anything into the text. We're just going to take out of the text specifically what the text says. And then I think you arrive at a biblical conclusion. And keeping that rule in place that we're only going to use specifically what the text says. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, it doesn't say that David and Jonathan have any kind of relationship. It just says that they really liked each other. Now, I have guys that I love a lot. And it's okay to say that. And here you have two guys who loved each other a lot. That is a central theme throughout the Bible, this love that does no wrong to another person. And that's really what you see there in 2 Samuel 1. I don't think it's talking about a romantic element at all. It's just not in the text. And so that's just a good general rule anytime you're dealing with any question, is you have to deal with what the text says, not what you want it to say, or not what it doesn't say. You can only deal with what the text says. Harvey, I love you too, man. And so that's kind of how I would start to answer that, is just using that general rule. If you go and you read the text, Jeff, I don't know if you're still with us. We had to restart the live stream. But when you go and you look at the text, it doesn't say that. And so that would be my answer. If somebody said, 2 Samuel chapter 1 shows that David and Jonathan had a relationship. So yeah, it does. It does have a relation. They do, but they're friends. It doesn't have the kind of relationship that somebody is trying to push into the text. It doesn't say that. And that's where we would have to insist. And again, that cuts both ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Harvey said he loves you too.
Oh, we love you too, Harvey.
So that's where we'll leave it. And if you have people, or if you yourself want to talk about that topic more, we can. We just have to be very careful when we talk about it, because again, I always like to stress, anytime we're talking about something like this, we're talking about people. And when we talk about people, regardless of where they or we fall in any discussion, we want to love them first. And we want them to know that we love them. And when we're working forward toward a biblical response, toward understanding what the Bible says, we want that whole process to be based on love. We might not agree where we wind up. We might come to a conclusion sometimes that puts us at odds with the other person. But even when that happens, they should know that we love them. And that's paramount. And so if you or anybody else is interested in continuing that conversation further and talking about that more, the question of homosexuality or same-sex attraction is a very complicated and very nuanced discussion. And so that's how whenever I talk to people who have that question, that's always one of the rules, is when we look at the biblical text, that's where we're going to get our answers from. Our answers are going to come straight from the Bible, and that's how we know this is what God wants. But we are only going to take precisely what the text says, and we'll work forward only with what the text says. Because, really, why would you care what I think? What does my opinion on it matter about something like that? It doesn't. What matters is what God says. And that's what I want too. I don't want my opinion to be the one that I follow. So I try really hard to just take what God is saying in the text. Sometimes I do a good job. Sometimes I do a terrible job. And I don't know that I'm doing a terrible job, right? I never do that on purpose. But sometimes I just, without even knowing I'm doing it, I read things into the text. And so we need each other to say, hey, you can't do that. That's not there. You're making that up. And so it's a really, it's a good question. And it brings us to a great point that we need to focus on what the text actually says when we're trying to figure things out like that. So that may be a long answer to say that it's poetry. And so you have to, but I don't know. What do you think? Anything to add to that? Correct?
No. No, you have much more knowledge than I do. I think that's a good explanation. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, I have...
Jeff says thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad that we connected again after it cut us out.
And Carolyn Myers is watching from Canada.
Oh, cool.
That's pretty cool.
What part of Canada? I probably won't know. If it's not like Montreal or Quebec or Edmonton. Basically, all the places that have a hockey team, I know those. But... yeah, that's cool that you're watching from Canada. I'm glad you're able to join us. Anything else? No? All right, well, that's about an hour. So we'll go ahead and we'll call that this week. We're going to start with, we have some other questions I forgot. We'll start with some of the other questions that people sent in, and we'll see if maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about fasting and prayer and how those things fit together next time. All right. Thank you for joining us. We're glad that we got to do this with you guys. North of Toronto. Cool. I know Toronto. Hey, there's something that they eat there. It's like fries and gravy with bacon or something.
It sounds good.
Yeah. I don't know what it's called.
Sounds Southern.
No, it's Canadian food. Yeah.
Well, Southerners would like it.
Yeah. I've been told it's really good, but I can't remember the name of it. But it's like, if you think of Canadian food, like if you think Southern food, you think cornbread and fried chicken and sweet tea.
And gravy.
And gravy.
And fries. Yeah. And bacon. I think those are all.
Well, no, this is like.
We're kindred spirits.
When you think of Canadian food, this is that, but I can't remember. Okay. And it's not Canadian bacon. That's just fried ham. It's, that's it. Poutine. Is that how you say it? Poutine? But that's it. I want to try that. So
that sounds good.
If we're ever close to Canada, I want to try that.
We could just look up a recipe and try to make it since we're in quarantine. We're not going to be going anywhere.
We could, but I don't know if I'm Canadian enough to make it.
I'll try.
You try.
Send me a good recipe. I'll try it out.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We love you all. And again, we're just trying to stick to what God says and find answers to the questions. And if you have answers, please, you don't have to just share questions. If you have answers or insight or comments, share those too. And we'll all grow together and become more like God every day. All right. We'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.